Here's where I'm going to push back on you. I've got Terrell Owens as the number 2 receiver of all time, behind Jerry Rice. And it has nothing to do with talent. If we're talking pure skill, let's just say this list goes off of pure talent. That's it. Mm-hmm. Pure God-given talent. You could easily make the case that it's Randy Moss. You could easily make the case that it's Megatron, just because they're freaks. It's just things that you've never seen. Here's my thing. When you put up Terrell Owens and Randy Moss's numbers together, they are strikingly similar. I think it's the same amount of touchdown receptions, right? And I think that T.O. has more receptions, and I think that Randy Moss has more yards, if I remember it correctly.
Let me actually double check.
All right, so you can double check that. So I'll make my point real quick. So with Randy Moss, at the end of his career, he definitely tailed off. Now, he took a year off, and then he came back. You know, the 49ers brought him back. We made a Super Bowl. He wasn't really a contributor. I would argue that before Terrell Owens wasn't allowed to be back on the team, even when he was on the Bills and the Bengals, he was highly productive. Highly. Like, it wasn't even like he was just a guy out there for, like, you know, shits and giggles or anything like that, or it's just like, hey, let's have Terrell. No, Terrell Owens was still producing. And I still believe that if he was allowed to be on someone else's team, he still would have had productive years. That's my thing. And when I talk to you, you know, you and I talked about this offline in the DM, right? Terrell Owens doesn't take a play off. You want to say what you want to say about Terrell Owens outside of the locker room? Go for it. Push-ups in the locker room. I mean, in the driveway, saying all the wrong things, calling his quarterback out of his name and doing it. Fine. You want to talk about all that? That's fine. And that's fair game. On the field, when T.O.'s on the field, you get 100. And you always get 100. He may come and yell at you on the sideline, but when he's on the field, he doesn't take the play off. He doesn't walk off the field like Randy Moss does. And Randy Moss, at the end of his career, I would argue, wasn't as productive as Terrell Owens was, and Terrell Owens could have been. So that would be my argument for why Terrell Owens is there, especially when you put their numbers in, how strikingly similar they are. Yeah. If you want to read them off to me real quick.
Yeah, let's see. In terms of receptions, T.O. is 8 with 1,078. Randy Moss is 15th at 982. Let me go to touchdowns real quick.
Tied.
Are they tied?
They tied, or Randy Moss has like one more?
Randy Moss has 156. T.O. has 153.
There you go. 3 more.
Yeah.
I knew it was that close. And remember, T.O. wasn't allowed to play the last few years. I still believe right now that if you put Terrell Owens on a wide receiver Baron team, probably could give you 25 receptions for like 200 yards, 300 yards.
Do you remember? I think it was like the 2013 preseason. He was on the Seahawks during that preseason, and then he got cut.
I hated it.
And yeah, that was the weirdest thing in the world.
Him and Jerry went over there at the end of their careers, and I try to burn that out of my mind, so I never have to see it again.
Yeah, that's fair.
But when you look at the numbers, right? So if you're going strictly numbers, let's say an alien came down and said, "Talk to me about Terrell Owens and Randy Moss," and we couldn't show him any film, and we just showed him the numbers. Off the numbers, you would just say, "Boom! Look at this guy. Look at how much more he has." I get why you would put Randy Moss ahead of him. I just don't have Randy Moss ahead of him because he's physically gifted more than Terrell Owens. I think that a lot of the context in the discussion has to be around how long he played well, and I really believe that Terrell Owens could have played a little bit longer, and he still was outproducing Randy Moss. But go ahead, I'll give you the floor so you can go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you touched on it. Their numbers are really similar. T.O. has about 600 more receiving yards than Randy Moss. The thing about Randy, though, is that he was just always, that big play waiting to happen. Yeah. He's the greatest deep threat in NFL history. So the fact that, he's 15th all time receptions, but 4th in yards, I think that says a lot about,
that's a lot.
What a big playmaker he was. So
what was it? Three catches, 173 yards, 3 touchdowns.
3 touchdowns on Thanksgiving.
I'll never forget that.
The Cowboys. Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
I wasn't born yet. I was a month away from being born.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But yes. So you can make the argument that, T.O. is better than Randy, especially because the thing that you touched on was the fact that, all right, Randy had, the Titans years and the 49ers years and
the Raiders years,
the Raiders years, and the second Vikings years. Was the second coming of the Vikings years weren't terrible. That first year he got the Favre.
Remember, he was on the Raiders and then he went to the Patriots and broke the record.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was still in there. It's just I question Randy's ethic when it comes to stuff like that. When things are going wrong, Randy don't want that. He don't want to go through adversity. But when he was on the Pats, him and Brady link up and things got different. But also when you get there, Belichick is gonna let you know, bro. And he knew like bro, you're not gonna be able to blow this up. So don't even try it. So that's just my thing more than anything. Look, you want to say what you want about Terrell Owens and what he did off the field. That's cool. I get it. I understand all that. I'm just talking about on the field when it's time to go get money. The guy played on a broken leg in the Super Bowl.
He did.
And no one ever talks about that. If Brett Favre did that and lost, they would have 3 statues outside of the Hall of Fame because of the way that Terrell Owens acted. No one remembers that. No one remembers that, honestly, man. And that's the stuff that I point to when it comes to all that. But again, I understand the argument about Randy because of the things that you talked about. He has that many receptions, fewer receptions. Jesus, learn how to talk. Jesus. He has that few receptions to to Terrell Owens, and he still has that many more yards, and that's incredible, man. And what? The single season touchdown record?
Yeah, 23.
Which he broke Jerry Rice's record, which Jerry Rice did in a strike shortened year.
12 games. Yes. 22 touchdowns in 12 games. That was absurd. Yes.
That's insane. I mean, if that doesn't solidify Jerry Rice as being the GOAT, then I don't know what does. But either way, that's where I have a problem with this. So if you're asking me to do my list in the top 3, your 4 are fine. I'm fine with your 4, and I would just rank them differently. I would have TO2, I would have Moss 3, and I would have Megatron 4. Megatron suffers for me because of how long he played. That's it. He was dominant when he played, and he was the best in the league. But it's the short time that he was there. And I think that's what gives T.O. the edge because he was so good for so long. And that's the same thing with Randy Moss. So, I mean, that's really just where I'm at with it.
No, that's fair. And look, I wouldn't argue with you too much about putting T.O. above Randy Moss simply because, T.O. did it for, arguably longer. I think that span where you kind of combine the first go around with the Vikings combined with the Patriots, you just put those together and it's just absurd. So I wouldn't argue too much with putting T.O. above him because, he had better longevity and he didn't have, the Raiders years and the Titans years and the 49er years. That's fair. I wouldn't argue too much with that. It's just a matter of, all right, Randy is just a freak of nature in terms of, if as soon as he sticks that hand up, all right, this is about to be big. And I mean, we have a whole term about it. You got mossed. So for me, I think that you compiled the big playability with Randy. And when you look at, how good each were at their peaks, I would take Randy over T.O. That's just, my opinion. Again, I get the longevity argument. That's a valid argument to make. Personally, though, I would take Randy over T.O.